Well, do we get small government? Do we get balanced budgets? Do we get serious, as opposed to simply rhetorical, attention to traditional social values? The answer is no, because all of that really has simply been part of a package of tactics that Republicans have employed to get elected and then to stay in office.
And yet, you say that the prime example of political dysfunction today is the Democratic Party in relation to Iraq.
Well, I may be a conservative, but I can assure you that in November of 2006, I voted for every Democrat I could possibly come close to, and I did because the Democratic Party, speaking with one voice at that time, said that elect us, give us power in the Congress, and we will end the Iraq War. And the American people at that point, adamantly tired of this war, gave power to the Democrats in Congress. And they absolutely, totally, completely failed to follow through on their commitment. Now, there was a lot of posturing, but really the record of the Democratic Congress over the past 2 years has been one in which substantively all they have done is to appropriate the additional money that enables President Bush to continue that war.
And you say the promises of Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi proved to be empty. Reid and Pelosi's commitment to forcing a change in policy took a back seat to their concern to protect the Democratic majority.
Could anybody disagree with that?
You say, and this is another one of my highlighted sentences, to anyone with a conscience, sending soldiers back to Iraq or Afghanistan for multiple combat tours while the rest of the country chills out can hardly be seen as an acceptable arrangement. It is unfair, unjust, and morally corrosive. And yet that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I think I don't want to talk about my son here.
Your son?
Yeah.
You dedicate the book to your son.
Yeah. Well, my son was killed in Iraq, and I don't want to talk about that because it's very personal. But it has long stuck in my craw, this posturing of supporting the troops. I don't want to insult people. There are many people who say they support the troops and they really mean it. But when it comes really down to understanding what does it mean to support the troops, it needs to mean more than putting a sticker on the back of your car. I don't think we actually support the troops. We the people. What we the people do is we contract out the business of national security to approximately 0.5% of the population, about 1.5 million people that are on active duty. And then we really turn away. We don't want to look when they go back for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 combat tours. That's not supporting the troops. That's an abdication of civic responsibility. And I do think there's something fundamentally immoral about that. Again, as I tried to say, I think the global war on terror as a framework of thinking about policy is deeply defective. But if one believes in the global war on terror, then why isn't the country actually supporting it in a meaningful, substantive sense?
A draft?
Where is the country?
Are you calling for a reinstatement of the draft?
I'm not calling for a restatement of the draft because I understand that politically that's an impossibility, and to tell you the truth, we don't need to have an army of 6 or 8 or 10 million people. But we do need to have the country engaged in what its soldiers are doing in some way that has meaning. And that simply doesn't exist today.
Well, despite your loss, your and your wife's loss. You say in this powerful book what to me is a paradox. You say that ironically Iraq may yet prove to be the source of our salvation. Help me to understand that.
We're going to have a long argument about the Iraq War, we Americans, not unlike the way we had a very long argument about the Vietnam War. Matter of fact, maybe the argument about the Vietnam War continues to the present day. And that argument is going to cause us, I hope, to ask serious questions about where this war came from. How do we come to be a nation in which we really thought that we could transform the greater Middle East with our army? What have been the costs that have been imposed on this country? Hundreds of billions of dollars, some projections $2 to $3 trillion. Where's that money coming from? How else could it have been spent? For what? Who bears the burden? Who died? Who suffered loss? Who's in hospitals? Who's suffering from PTSD? And was it worth it? Now, there will be plenty of people who are going to say, absolutely, it was worth it. We overthrew this dictator. But I hope and pray that there will be many others who will make the argument that it wasn't worth it. It was a fundamental mistake. It never should have been undertaken. And we're never going to do this kind of thing again. And that might be the moment when we look ourselves in the mirror and we see what we have become, and perhaps undertake an effort to make those changes in the American way of life that will enable us to preserve for future generations that which we value most about the American way of life.
The book is The Limits of Power, The End of American Exceptionalism. Andrew J. Bacevich, thank you for being with me.
Thank you very much.
The Limits of Power is one in a series of books called The American Empire Project. Several noted scholars and writers are examining American aspirations at home and abroad, looking for ways to foster democracy without succumbing to imperial ambitions. Go to our website at pbs.org to link to more information about the American Empire Project and to read Bacevich's new essay on the Long War at tomdispatch.com. Also on our website, you'll find an interactive map where you can add your voice to the discussion of foreign affairs and other issues. That's online at pbs.org. That's it for the Journal. We'll see you again next week. I'm Bill Moyers.